Hello and welcome to the Veilrun Tapes. Every story here is true. It happened to a real person, and they wrote it down or said it out loud, so the rest of us would know. Tonight, I'll share a few of them with you. A lot of you come back here every night, and that means a lot to me. These stories stay with people. That's just what they do. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read all of them. And if you like these stories, a quick like and subscribe really help. Now get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin.
The first incident was with a woman who lived on the right side of the hall, in a room directly next to the juncture. That part of the building always felt a little different to me, though I do not know if I can explain why without sounding dramatic. In medical facilities, especially ones where people live long-term or are near the end of their lives, certain hallways seem to carry their own mood. During the day, when staff are moving around, lights are on, meals are being passed, televisions are playing, and call lights are going off, everything feels normal enough. It is busy, tiring, and sometimes sad, but still normal. At night, though, the same hallway can feel completely different. The sounds stretch farther. The lights feel colder. The quiet rooms on both sides of you feel less empty than they should. This woman's room sat right beside that juncture, and one night, sometime in the middle of the night, we heard her screaming. I can still remember the sound even now. I cannot remember clearly if she triggered her cool light first or if the screams came before it, but I can still hear those muffled, terror-filled wails coming from her room. It was not the kind of yell a resident makes when they are annoyed, confused, or calling for help in a normal way. This was fear, real fear. The kind that makes everyone nearby stop what they are doing and run. We all raced down the hall toward her room. In a place like that, you learn to react fast. A scream in the middle of the night could mean a fall, a medical emergency, a nightmare, pain, confusion, or someone trying to get out of bed when they cannot safely do it. You do not take your time. You move. The hallway seemed longer than usual as we rushed toward the sound, and by the time we reached the door, she was still screaming. When we threw the door open, she was in her bed, thrashing and pointing toward her bedroom window. Her whole body was full of panic. She was not just upset, she was terrified, pointing so hard at the window that it was obvious she believed something was there. She kept insisting she had seen two men standing outside, leering at her through the glass. She described them as construction workers. That detail stood out right away because it was so specific. She did not just say men or people. She said they looked like construction workers, and she was certain they had been outside her window. But it was past midnight. The courtyard outside was locked up completely. There should not have been anyone out there at all, let alone two construction workers standing around and staring into a resident's room. We checked. We looked outside. We looked at the window. We looked for any sign of movement or anyone who could have been there. There was nothing. No men. No workers. No shadows moving away. No open gate. Nothing that explained why she had seen what she said she had seen. Of course, in medical settings, it is easy to explain things away at first. Residents can wake from dreams. Some people become confused at night. Some see things that are not there, especially when they are tired, sick, medicated, or dealing with memory issues. Anyone who has worked in a facility knows that the line between fear, confusion, dreams, and reality can blur for residents after dark. So even though the incident was unsettling, there were still ways to make it feel explainable. Maybe she had a nightmare. Maybe a reflection on the window looked like someone standing outside. Maybe shadows from the room or courtyard made shapes her mind turned into men. That is what I tried to tell myself. But then the second incident happened. This one involved an older man directly across the hall on the left, again sharing a wall with that same juncture. He was not mean, but he was not exactly friendly either. He mostly preferred to stay to himself. Some residents like talking to staff, telling stories, asking questions, and keeping you in the room as long as they can. He was not like that. He would speak when he wanted something simple, like coffee or Tylenol, but otherwise he seemed content to be left alone. He did not go out of his way to be difficult, and he did not seem like someone who wanted attention. He just kept to himself. That made it stranger when he became frightened. One night, he told us he saw 2 men, the same number. 2 men. He said they had been standing in his room and would not leave him alone. His fear was visible in a way I can still picture. His eyes seemed to shine white from fear, wide and bright in his face as he looked at us. This was not annoyance or confusion in the usual sense. He was scared in a deep, helpless way. It was the kind of fear that makes someone suddenly vulnerable, even if they usually act private and independent. He did not want to be alone. He did not want us to leave the room. He kept insisting that the men had been there with him, standing in his room, bothering him, refusing to leave. I do not remember every word he used, but I remember the feeling of sitting with him and realizing how shaken he was. It is one thing when someone tells you they saw something and then calms down quickly. It is another when they cling to you because they are afraid the moment you step away, whatever they saw will come back. He would not let me leave for more than a few seconds at a time. Every time I tried to step out, he became upset again. He wanted me close. He insisted I hold his hand as he drifted back off to sleep. That was not normal for him. Like I said, he was not an overly affectionate or needy resident. He was not the type to want someone holding his hand just because. That night, he needed it. He needed the physical proof that someone living was there with him. I sat in a chair next to him, holding his hand while he slowly started to settle. The room was dim and quiet, and I remember sitting there thinking about how strange it was. The woman across the hall had seen 2 men outside her window. Now this man, in a room directly across and sharing that same area of the hallway, had seen 2 men standing in his room. I tried to be practical. Maybe the first incident had stuck in my mind, and now I was connecting things that were not connected. Maybe there was some environmental factor near that juncture. Maybe residents in that part of the hall were more prone to confusion. Maybe it was just coincidence. Then something happened behind me. From his closed closet, which was more like a cabinet than a full closet, came the sound of hangers clacking together. It was not a tiny sound. It was not one little click that could be blamed on a hanger settling or a vibration in the room. It sounded like someone had run their fingers slowly along the whole row of hangers. One after another. Clack, 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 deliberate and controlled. The closet door was closed behind my back, and I was sitting in the chair beside the bed, still holding his hand. The sound came from inside that closed space, exactly like someone was in there touching the hangers. Every hair on my body stood up. There are some sounds that your body understands before your mind has time to explain them. That was one of them. I knew what hangers sounded like when someone moved them. I knew the difference between a single hanger shifting and the slow, deliberate clacking of several being touched in a row. That sound had intention in it. It sounded like someone wanted me to know they were there, right behind me. I did not turn around for long. I do not even know if I fully looked. I only remember the fear hitting me so hard that I slipped my hand from his sleepy grip and left the room. I ran. I am not proud of it, because he was scared and vulnerable, but in that moment, something in me was done. I could handle residents being afraid. I could handle stories, nightmares, confusion, and cool lights. But sitting in a room where a man had just told me 2 men were bothering him, then hearing something move the hangers in a closed closet behind me, was too much. Seconds later, when he rang again, I made another worker go in my place. I know how that sounds, but I could not go back in right away. My body was still reacting to that clacking sound. The man had needed comfort, and I had tried to give it, but whatever was in that room, or whatever happened in that room, had scared me badly. I kept thinking about the closet. I kept hearing that slow, deliberate sound in my head. It felt like the room had answered my doubts. I had been sitting there questioning the strangeness of the 2 men's story, and then the closet behind me made a sound that did not belong. Still, even after that, you try to move on. In medical facilities, you do not always get time to process things. You have work to do. Other residents need you. Medications, rounds, call lights, charting, cleaning, checks, emergencies, all of it keeps moving. You cannot stop a shift because you are scared. So you push it down. You tell yourself, maybe the hangers shifted. Maybe there was an air current. Maybe the closet was not fully stable. Maybe your nerves were already high because of what the resident said, so the sound felt worse than it was. But then came the 3rd incident. The 3rd and final incident I can recall happened in the room directly adjacent to the old man's room. Again, it was right there near that same part of the hall, close to the juncture that now had 2 strange stories attached to it. This room had a man staying there while he waited for an opening in a hospice house. He was very sick, unfortunately dying of cancer, and by that point he had lost the ability to move on his own. He could not even bring a hand to his lips to feed himself. He was physically helpless in a way that made the next part even harder to explain. All we saw at first was the flash of his call light. Then came his cries for help. His voice was thin and panicked, the kind of cry that makes your stomach drop before you even know what is wrong. Again, we raced to the end of the hall. By then, that section of the facility already had an uneasy reputation in my mind. But when a resident calls for help, you go. You do not stand there thinking about ghosts or strange stories. You move fast, because there could be a real emergency. When we entered and flipped on the lights, we found a small gash on the man's head. Blood was dribbling down his face. That changed everything. This was not only a resident claiming to have seen something. This was physical injury. He was in bed, unable to move enough to do basic things for himself, and somehow he had a fresh cut on his head. We immediately started trying to figure out what could have caused it. We searched the room frantically. We looked for a fallen object, something sharp, anything that might have dropped from a shelf or table. We checked for a zipper, checked his nails, checked anything near him that could possibly have made the cut. We were looking for a practical answer, because there had to be one. But there was nothing, no object out of place that explained it, nothing close enough to strike him, nothing in his hands, not that he could have used them anyway, nothing obvious on the bed, nothing that made sense. The wound was small, but it was real. The blood was real. Something had happened to him. Then he told us what he had seen. He said 2 construction workers had been in his room. They had been teasing and taunting him. Then, suddenly, they hit him on the head with a 2x4. We all looked at each other. There are moments when a group of people hears the same thing and nobody knows what to say. This was one of those moments. 2 construction workers, again not just men, not just shadows, but construction workers. The same description the woman had given. the same number the older man had given. And now this man, who could not move and had no way to injure himself that we could find, was saying those two men had been in his room and had struck him. Of course, we could not write that down as the real cause. We could not say 2 unseen construction workers attacked him with a board. We had to clean his wound, make sure he was okay, document what needed to be documented, and increase checks. That was the practical side, the facility side, the staff side. But inside, all of us were trying to understand what we had just heard and seen. A man who could not move had a gash on his head, and his explanation matched the previous incidents in the same little section of the hall. That was the part that made it hard to dismiss. If only the woman had seen 2 men outside her window, maybe it could be a dream or reflection. If only the older man had seen 2 men in his room, maybe it could be confusion or fear. If only the hospice patient had claimed to see men, maybe it could be medication, illness, or end-of-life visions. But all 3 incidents happened in rooms clustered around that same juncture, and all 3 involved 2 men. 2 construction workers, or men described in that way. The 3rd incident even left a physical injury. I never got an answer or explanation. No one did, as far as I know. There was no discovery of a staff member playing some cruel prank. No trespassers were found. No unlocked courtyard, no evidence of people outside, no hidden explanation for the window incident. No person in the old man's closet, no object found that could have cut the hospice patient's head. No normal thread we could follow to make all 3 incidents make sense together. The events just happened, one after another, in that same area, and then seemed to stop. I never had another incident to that same degree while working there again. There may have been smaller, odd things, the kind medical facilities always seem to collect, but nothing like those 3. Nothing that built on itself like that. Nothing with the same repeated image of 2 construction workers appearing to residents around the same hallway juncture. That makes it even stranger to me. It was not constant chaos. It was more like something in that part of the building became active for a while, made itself known through different residents, and then went quiet again. Medical facilities love to be a hotspot, at least from my experience. Maybe it is because so much happens there. People are born in some medical places and die in others. People suffer there, heal there, grieve there, wait there, fear there, and sometimes spend their final days there. Staff come and go, residents come and go, families visit, and emotions run high even when everyone is trying to stay professional. Places like that are full of human energy, for lack of a better word. If any kind of place would hold on to something, it makes sense that a medical facility would. But I still wonder about those 2 men. Were they attached to the building? Were they connected to that particular part of the hall? Had there been construction there at some point? Did something happen during a renovation? Were they real people who had died there or nearby? Or were the residents seeing something their minds could understand only as construction workers? I do not know. I do not even know if the word ghost is the right word. What I do know is that 3 people in that same area saw or experienced something connected to 2 men, and at least one of them ended up physically hurt. The first woman saw them outside her window, leering at her from a locked courtyard where no one should have been. The older man saw them in his room and was so terrified he would not let me leave. And then I heard the hangers clacking in his closed closet behind me. The dying man, unable to move, said 2 construction workers had teased and taunted him before hitting him on the head with a 2x4, and we found blood running down his face with no clear cause. Those are not easy things to forget. I can still hear the woman's muffled screams. I can still see the old man's frightened eyes. I can still hear the hangers clacking slowly behind my back. I can still remember the look we all gave each other when the hospice patient said construction workers, because by then the phrase meant something. It was not random anymore. It was a pattern, and patterns are what makes strange things frightening. One resident seeing something could be explained. Two residents seeing similar things could be coincidence. 3 incidents, all in the same little area, all involving 2 men, one with a physical injury, felt like something more. I do not know what it was, and I probably never will. But I know that hallway did not feel the same after that. Even now, when I think about medical facilities at night, I think about that juncture. I think about the rooms around it, quiet under dim lights, each with someone vulnerable inside. I think about how helpless people can be in those places, and how terrible it would feel to see something standing in your room when you cannot get away. I think about that man asking me to hold his hand because he was too afraid to be alone. And I think about the sound from the closet behind me. That sound still bothers me more than I like to admit. We never got an answer. We cleaned wounds, checked rooms, answered call lights, comforted residents, and kept working. But whatever those residents saw, whatever moved in that closed closet, and whatever left that small gash on a helpless man's head, it stayed with me. Medical facilities are full of stories, but that hallway had one of its own. I was around 3 years old and still not potty trained. I was always a nervous child, the kind of child who needed time to adjust to new things and new routines. Some kids can be pushed into a change and adapt quickly, but I was not like that. If something felt unfamiliar or too sudden, my whole body would fight it before I even had the words to explain why. At that age, I could not sit down and calmly tell adults what I was feeling. I could not explain fear in a clear way. I could only cry, scream, kick, or refuse. To adults, that can look like stubbornness. To a small child, it can feel like survival. This is one of my earliest memories. It is so early that for a long time I wondered if it could really be true. Memories from that age can be strange. They can feel like little pieces of a dream, clear in some places and missing in others. But this memory has never felt like a dream to me. It has always felt real. It has stayed in my mind with a sharpness that most of my other memories from that age do not have. I have asked for clarification since then, just to make sure I was remembering at least the basic situation correctly, and the people who were there have confirmed enough of it to make me believe that the event really did happen the way I remember it. My mother and my aunt were very close. They were so close that they practically co-parented all their children together. In our family, that was normal. The adults were involved in each other's lives, and the children were not raised in completely separate little bubbles. My aunt was not just someone who visited sometimes and stayed out of things. She was close enough to my mother that she had a real role in helping with us. So when she learned that I still was not potty trained at my age, she was certain she could help. From the adult point of view, I understand it now. They probably thought I was just nervous about the toilet, or that I had built it up in my mind and needed a little push. They probably thought if they could get me to sit there once or twice, I would realise there was nothing to be afraid of. Maybe they thought I needed encouragement. Maybe they thought I needed a firm approach. I do not think they were trying to hurt me. They were doing what many adults do with children when they think a child is being difficult about something that seems simple to them. My mother, my aunt, and one of their friends were all there trying to get me to sit on the toilet. I did not even have to go yet. That was not really the point. They were not rushing me because I was about to have an accident. They were trying to get me used to the idea of sitting there to make the toilet feel normal. At least, that is what I think now. At the time, I only knew that they were trying to put me somewhere I did not want to be. They pulled down my pants and were holding me, trying to set me down on the toilet. Again, to them, this was probably one of those frustrating but funny parenting moments. A little kid making a huge scene over something ordinary. They had all been around children before. They had probably seen children scream over baths, hairbrushing, medicine, shoes, car seats, and all kinds of things that adults know are safe. I am sure they thought I was afraid of the toilet itself. Maybe the size of it, maybe the sound of flushing, maybe the cold seat, maybe the idea of changing from diapers or training pants to something new. But that was not it. I screamed. I kicked. I pushed with as much of my little body as I could. I tried to get away from the toilet with everything I had. I was not pretending. I was not being difficult for no reason. I was terrified. I remember using my arms and legs, twisting and pushing away, trying not to let them lower me onto the seat. I was small, but fear can make even a little child strong for a moment. I fought as hard as I could, because in my mind, they were not trying to sit me on a toilet. They were trying to put me within reach of something that was inside it. They laughed while it was happening. I do not say that to make them sound cruel. I think they genuinely did not understand what I was seeing. From their side, it must have looked absurd. 3 adults trying to help a little child sit on the toilet while the child acted like they were being lowered into a pit. It probably seemed funny in that exhausted adult way, where a child's overreaction can seem dramatic and ridiculous. They did not know I was seeing something. They did not know my fear had a reason. They did not seem to see what I saw. In the toilet was a human hand. I remember it so vividly that I could draw it even now, at 30 years old. That is the part that makes this memory different from all the blurry memories of early childhood. It was not just something scary. It was not a vague, dark shape in the bowl. It was a hand, and I can still see the details. Coming right up from the drain of the toilet was a withered, elderly hand. It looked feminine. The fingers were long and slim, almost delicate in shape, but the hand itself was awful to look at. The skin was brown-grey and very wrinkled, like old skin that had lost all warmth and life. The veins under the skin were almost black, standing out in a way that made the hand look sick, dead, or something close to dead. And it had long red fingernails. That detail has never left me. They were not just red in a dull or natural way. They were bright red, almost candy red. The kind of red that looks too vivid against dead-looking skin. Those nails made the hand feel even more wrong, because they gave it a strange human detail. It was not like seeing a claw from an animal or a random horror shape. It looked like the hand of an old woman, thin and bony, with long painted nails, reaching up from a place no hand should ever be. The nails were long enough that I noticed them immediately, and bright enough that they are still one of the clearest parts of the memory. I remember the bony wrist it was attached to as well. It was not just a hand floating by itself. There was a wrist coming up from the drain, thin and old-looking, disappearing into the darkness below. That made it worse, because it suggested there was more beneath the toilet, more below the drain, more hidden in a place that should only have pipes and water. I did not understand plumbing at 3 years old. Not really, but I knew enough to know a human hand should not be coming from there. The hand was moving. It was patting around the bottom of the toilet bowl, as if it was looking for something without being able to see it. That is the best way I can describe it. It moved the way your hand might move under a couch when you are trying to find a dropped pen or a toy. The fingers felt around the porcelain, tapping and searching blindly. It did not look like the hand knew exactly where I was at first. It looked like it was feeling around, reaching, trying to find something. But the more I screamed, the more frantic it seemed to get. That is what made me believe it wanted me. The hand seemed to react to my fear. As I screamed and fought, it moved faster, more eager, almost excited. The fingers searched harder. The long red nails moved against the inside of the bowl. It felt like if the adults managed to set me down, the hand would grab me. I did not know what would happen after that. I did not have a detailed idea of danger. I only knew I had to stay away from it. Every instinct in me said that if I got close enough, it would get me. The adults did not see it. That was the nightmare inside the nightmare. I was not just afraid of the hand. I was afraid because the people who were supposed to protect me could not see it and were trying to move me closer to it. In their eyes, I was screaming at an ordinary toilet. In my eyes, they were laughing while lowering me toward a dead woman's hand reaching out of the drain. I can still remember that helpless feeling. I wanted them to understand. I wanted someone to look and see what I saw. But I was too young to explain it clearly, and even if I had said hand, they probably would have thought I meant something else. The whole thing lasted several minutes, though it may have felt longer because I was so scared. They tried to get me to sit, and I fought with everything I had. I screamed until I could not do anything else. I kicked and pushed and twisted away from the toilet. Eventually, they gave up. Maybe they decided I was too upset. Maybe they realized forcing the issue was not going to work. Maybe they were tired of fighting me. Whatever the reason, they stopped trying that day. I did not go on that toilet. Days later, they tried again at a different house. This time, I did not resist at all. That part confused them. To them, it probably seemed like I had suddenly gotten over my fear. Just a few days earlier, I had screamed, kicked, and refused so violently that they had to stop. Then, at another house, I complied without any issue. They thought it was weird. Maybe they thought I had finally accepted the idea. Maybe they thought I had been dramatic the first time, and now realized the toilet was not scary. But that was not the reason. I did not resist because there was nothing in that toilet. That was the difference. It was not the toilet itself that scared me. It was what I saw inside the first one. At the different house, I looked, and there was no hand. No grey-brown skin, no black veins, no red nails, no bony wrist. Nothing patting around the bowl, nothing reaching from the drain. It was just a toilet. A normal toilet, and because it was normal, I could sit on it. That is why the sudden change in my behaviour made perfect sense to me, even if it made no sense to the adults. Years later, I asked my aunt about it. I needed to know if the memory had any real foundation. Because when you carry a childhood memory that strange, you eventually start questioning yourself. Did I make it up? Was it a dream that got attached to a real potty training moment? Did I see a shadow or a reflection? Did I misunderstand something at 3 years old and turn it into a hand? So I asked my aunt what she remembered, not because I expected her to confirm the hand, but because I wanted to know whether the situation around it happened. She remembered it the same way in the practical sense. She remembered that I kicked and screamed and refused to go on the toilet. She remembered that I fought hard. She remembered that I was terrified, and she remembered that, just a few days later, when they tried again, I complied without issue. That confirmed the pattern I had remembered. It was not some random dream. There really had been a dramatic refusal at one house and an easy attempt later at another. Then, I told her what I remembered seeing. She just listened and nodded. She said she did not see anything in the toilet at all. She remembered looking because I seemed so horrified. That detail matters too. She did look. She did not simply ignore the toilet. She checked because my reaction was so extreme that she thought something had scared me. but she saw nothing. To her, it was an empty toilet bowl. She thought maybe I had seen a spider or something like that. Something small but frightening to a little kid. Of course, she never imagined I was seeing a ghastly hand coming out of the drain. That conversation stayed with me because it gave me both confirmation and no answer. My aunt confirmed that my fear was real and that the event happened. She confirmed that my reaction was intense and unusual. She confirmed that I changed completely when we tried again at a different house, but she also confirmed that she did not see the hand. So whatever I saw, it was either only visible to me, or it was something my mind created with such detail that it has stayed with me for almost my entire life. I had never seen anything like it before. That is another reason I struggle to explain it as imagination. I was 3 years old. I had not watched horror movies full of dead hands reaching out of toilets. I had not seen images of withered elderly hands with long red nails coming up from drains. I did not have some clear source for the image. Children can imagine strange things, yes, but this was so detailed and specific. The grey-brown wrinkled skin, the black veins, the long, slim feminine fingers, the candy red nails, the bony wrist, the blind searching movement. It was not a simple childish fear like monster in the toilet. It was a complete image, and I have never seen anything like it since. No other toilet ever had that effect on me. I was not permanently afraid of all toilets. I did not spend my whole childhood screaming every time someone tried to make me use one. Once I was at a different house and the hand was not there, I was fine. That makes the first experience even stranger. If it had only been a general fear of the toilet, the fear should have followed me. But it did not. The fear was attached to that specific moment, that specific toilet, and that specific thing inside it. I still completely remember that hand. Even now, at 30, I can close my eyes and see it. I see the white curve of the toilet bowl, the dark drain, and the withered hand coming up from it. I see those long fingers patting around the bottom, searching blindly. I see the red nails moving against the porcelain. I remember the feeling of being held by adults who were trying to help me but could not see the danger. I remember screaming while they laughed because, to them, there was nothing there. I remember the terror that the hand would find me if I got too close. I do not know what it was. Maybe it was a hallucination. Maybe my young brain created an image out of fear, stress, and confusion. Maybe the water, shadows, and reflections made something look like a hand to a 3-year-old mind. Maybe there was a stain, a toy, a brush, a spider, or something else in the bowl, and my brain turned it into the worst possible thing. Those explanations are possible, and I understand why people might lean toward them. A 3-year-old's memory is not perfect, and fear can shape what we see. But none of that explains how real it still feels. None of it explains why I was not afraid at the other house a few days later. None of it explains why the hand seemed to move and react to my screaming. And none of it explains why I can still remember every detail decades later. Maybe some things are only meant to be seen by children. Maybe children notice things adults cannot. Or maybe fear opens some little door in the mind that adults have already learned to close. I do not know. I only know that when I was a nervous 3-year-old child, my mother, my aunt, and their friend tried to set me on a toilet to help me get used to it. They thought I was afraid of the toilet. But I was not afraid of the toilet. I was afraid of the withered hand reaching up from inside it, patting blindly around the bowl, with long red nails and dead grey skin, getting more frantic the louder I screamed. And even after all these years, I can still see it. When I was maybe 8 or 9, we lived in this house that was just always kind of weird. I know a lot of people say that about old houses or places they lived in as kids, and sometimes it is probably just because childhood makes everything feel bigger and stranger than it really was. But this house was different. It had a feeling to it that never really went away. Even during the day, when the lights were on and everyone was home, there was something about it that felt slightly off, like the house was never completely quiet even when no one was moving. It was not always terrifying. Most of the time, it was just uncomfortable, the kind of feeling that made you look over your shoulder without knowing why. My sister and I shared a bedroom, and one of the strangest things about that room was the door. It did not matter how firmly we shut it. It did not even matter if we locked it. That door would still open on its own. Not every single time, but often enough that it became one of those things we all knew about. At first, of course, the adults had explanations. Maybe the latch was loose. Maybe the frame was crooked. Maybe old houses shift. Maybe a draft moved through the hallway. Maybe we had not actually shut it as tightly as we thought. But when you are a kid, and you know you closed a door, and you know it was locked, and then you watch or hear it open by itself, those explanations do not feel very comforting. There were other weird noises too. Little things that might not sound like much when you tell someone later, but they feel different when you are living with them. Sounds in the hallway when no one was supposed to be walking there. Soft bumps from rooms that should have been empty. The feeling that someone had just moved out of sight when you turned your head. That kind of thing. Nothing dramatic enough to make everyone pack up and leave, but enough to make the house feel like it had its own private life happening underneath ours. Things just always felt off there. As a child, I did not have the words to explain it properly. I could not say the energy felt heavy or that certain rooms had a strange mood. I just knew that some places in the house made me uncomfortable. The hallway outside our bedroom, for example, felt longer at night than it did during the day. The stairs seemed darker when everyone else was asleep. The living room, which could feel perfectly normal in the daytime, became a place I did not like looking into after the lights were off. It was as if the house changed after dark and the ordinary rooms became spaces where something else could move around. One night I woke up because I had to pee. I remember it being late, the kind of late where the whole house is quiet and the darkness feels thick. When you are 8 or 9, getting up in the middle of the night can feel like a huge task. You have to leave the warm safety of your bed, step into the dark, and walk through parts of the house that feel much bigger than they do in daylight. I probably lay there for a little while, hoping I could ignore it and fall back asleep, but eventually I had to get up. I came downstairs to use the bathroom, and our dog followed me down. That made me feel better. Having the dog with me was comforting. Dogs make a house feel safer, especially when you are a kid. Even if the dog is not huge or aggressive, just having him there makes you feel less alone. He had followed me like he normally would, close enough that I knew he was with me. I did not think anything of it at first. It was just our dog coming along with me in the middle of the night, probably curious or protective or just not wanting to be left behind. I went to the bathroom and did what I had to do. Everything seemed normal enough then, the kind of normal that still has a little fear under it because you are awake at night in a strange feeling house, but nothing had happened yet. I finished, came out, and started to go back upstairs. That was when I realised the dog was not following me. I called him to come with me. I expected him to come right away, because that was what he did. He was our dog. He knew us. He followed us around. If I called him, especially in the middle of the night when the house was quiet, he should have trotted after me without hesitation. But he did not come. I called again, standing near the stairs or the hallway, waiting for the sound of his paws on the floor. Nothing, At first, I was more confused than scared. Maybe he had stopped to sniff something. Maybe he had gone into the living room. Maybe he was being stubborn. But it was unlike him not to respond. Dogs usually react when you call them, even if they only look at you or come halfway. He was not doing anything. There was no sound from him, no collar jingling, no paws clicking, no movement. So I went into the living room to see where he was. The living room was dark, but not completely black. There must have been some little bit of light coming from somewhere, maybe from outside, maybe from another room, maybe just enough for shapes to exist in the dark. I stood in the doorway and looked in. That is when I saw two green eyes reflecting light at the end of our couch. They looked exactly like animal eyes do when light catches them, like when you take a picture of a dog or a cat and their eyes shine back at the camera. The colour was bright green, and the eyes were low enough and positioned in a way that made me think it had to be our dog. They were right there at the end of the couch, looking toward me, not moving, just staring. I stood in the doorway and kept calling him. I said his name, trying to get him to come with me. I expected the eyes to move. I expected him to lift his head, wag his tail, step out from behind the couch, or at least shift a little. But the eyes did not move at all. They stayed in the same place, shining green in the darkness. That was what started to make me feel strange. If it was our dog, why was he not coming? Why was he not even reacting? Why was he just sitting there, completely still, staring at me from the end of the couch? I was super confused because it was so unlike him. There was something wrong about the stillness. Animals move, even when they are standing still. They blink. Their heads tilt. Their bodies shift. Their ears move. They breathe. You can usually sense life in them, even in the dark, but those eyes stayed fixed in a way that did not feel like my dog at all. It was as if the eyes were attached to a shape I could not see, something that only wanted me to notice the reflection and nothing else. I called again. Still nothing. The longer I stood there, the more the living room stopped feeling like the living room. The couch became a dark shape. The end of it, where the eyes were sitting, seemed farther away than it should have been. The whole room felt silent in a way that made my skin start to prickle. I remember being a child and not fully understanding what I was afraid of. I knew I was looking at what should have been my dog, but my body was starting to tell me it was not him. That is a very specific kind of fear. It is not just seeing something scary. It is seeing something that should be familiar and realizing it is behaving wrong. The eyes never blinked, or at least I do not remember seeing them blink. They just reflected that green light, staring right back from the darkness. I could not make out a face. I could not see the shape of the body clearly. There were only the eyes, bright and still. If it had stepped forward, maybe I would have known what it was. If it had made a sound, maybe I would have had an answer. But it did not. It only watched. I started to feel weirded out. At that age, fear can trap you in place for a moment. You want to run, but you also want to keep watching, because turning your back on something unknown feels even worse. I stood there in the doorway, still trying to make it be normal in my head. It is the dog. It has to be the dog. He is just being strange. Maybe he is tired. Maybe he is lying there and not listening. Maybe the light makes his eyes look weird. But the more I called and the more nothing happened, the harder it became to believe that. Eventually, I gave up. I did not go closer to the couch. I did not walk into the living room and check. I think some part of me knew not to. Children do not always need a full explanation to understand danger. Sometimes the feeling is enough. I turned away from the living room and went back upstairs by myself, unsettled and confused. still thinking the dog was downstairs near the couch. When I got back to the bedroom, he was already there. He was in the room with my sister again. That was the moment the fear really hit me. Because if the dog was upstairs in the bedroom, then what had I been looking at in the living room? I had just called to those green eyes from the doorway. I had stood there thinking they belonged to him. I had been confused because he would not move, would not respond, would not come with me, but he had not been in the living room at all. He was already back upstairs in the bedroom with my sister. He must have gone up before me somehow, but that did not make sense with what I had seen. I had gone into the living room because I thought he had not followed me. The eyes were there, they were exactly where I was looking, and yet the real dog was upstairs. I was so freaked out. I do not remember if I woke my sister up or if I just got back into bed and tried to stay quiet. I only remember that feeling of realizing something did not add up. It was not like seeing a shadow and then finding out it was a chair. It was not like hearing a noise and then learning it was the dog. It was the opposite. I thought I was seeing the dog, and then I found the dog somewhere else. That meant the thing in the living room had been something else. The house already had a history of strange things happening, and this fit into that pattern too well. The bedroom door opening even when locked. The weird noises. The sense that the house was off, and now the green eyes in the living room, staring from the end of the couch, pretending to be where the dog should have been. I do not know if it was an animal. I do not know if there was some other creature in the house, though I cannot imagine what could have been there without us knowing. I do not know if it was a reflection from something ordinary, but I know what it looked like, 2 green eyes looking right at me. I have tried to explain it to myself over the years. Maybe the dog had actually been in the living room and then ran upstairs so fast and quietly that I did not notice. But that does not feel right. He would have had to pass me or take some path I missed, and I was calling him the whole time. Also, those eyes never moved. They stayed fixed at the end of the couch. If it had been him and he went upstairs, I would have seen or heard something. A dog does not disappear from a living room and reappear in a bedroom without making any sound, especially in a quiet house at night. Maybe it was another animal. A cat, maybe, or something that had gotten inside, but we would have known if there was another animal in the house. And those eyes were at the end of our couch, inside our living room, sitting there like they belonged. If some animal had somehow gotten in, it should have moved when I called, or run, or made noise. It did none of that. It only stared. Maybe it was a reflection of something in the room. That is the most logical explanation people might reach for. 2 small, shiny objects catching light can look like eyes, especially in the dark. Maybe there was something on the couch, something metallic or glass, reflecting green. But the placement and feeling were too exact. It looked like animal eyes. It looked alive enough that I called to it, thinking it was our dog, and the way it stayed still, almost waiting, made it worse. I still remember those eyes so vividly, even 19 years later. That is how I know the memory mattered. I do not remember every corner of that house. I do not remember every normal night or every regular trip downstairs. But I remember standing in that doorway, calling the dog, and seeing those 2 green eyes shining at the end of the couch. I remember the confusion first, then the fear. I remember how still they were. I remember going upstairs and finding the dog already in the bedroom. I remember the cold feeling that came after, when my mind finally understood that the thing I had been calling was not him. The worst part is that the eyes did not do anything dramatic. They did not lunge. They did not growl. They did not vanish in front of me. They just stayed there. Sometimes that is scarier than something obvious. If the thing had attacked or made a noise, maybe there would be less room for doubt. But the stillness gave it power. It forced me to wonder what it was, why it was there, and why it looked enough like my dog in the dark to make me call it. I think about the dog too. He had followed me downstairs, but somehow he ended up back upstairs with my sister. Did he see something I did not? Did he leave because he knew not to stay down there? Did he follow me partway, then turn around when he sensed whatever was in the living room? Dogs notice things people miss. Maybe he had already gone back to safety while I was still in the bathroom. Maybe he knew the living room was not empty. Maybe the reason he did not come when I called was because I was not calling him at all. That thought still makes me uncomfortable. Because I was standing there, calling my dog toward me, but something else was staring back. The house was always weird, so maybe this was just one more thing inside it. Maybe something there liked opening doors and making noises and showing itself in small ways. Maybe it used familiar shapes or reflections because that was all it could do. Or maybe, for one night only, I saw something that had always been there, watching from the dark parts of the house. I do not know. I only know that when I was 8 or 9, I got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. Our dog followed me downstairs. When I finished and tried to go back up, he did not come when I called. I went into the living room and saw 2 green eyes reflecting light at the end of the couch. I stood there, calling to them, but they never moved. Then I gave up, went upstairs, and found the dog already in the bedroom with my sister. It has been 19 years. And I still remember those eyes.
Quick pause, then we're right back. A lot of people watch one story and leave, but some stick around. They hit subscribe and come back every night. If you want to be one of them, the button's right there. Turn on the bell too, so you never miss a new one. That's it. Let's get back to the story.
This happened to my dad. He was in his 20s at the time, young enough that life still felt wide open, and he was not the kind of person who went around looking for paranormal meaning in every strange thing. From what he has told me, it started with a dream. At least, that is what he thought it was when he woke up. It was one of those dreams that feels too vivid, too detailed, and too real to be brushed off easily. But still, when you wake up in your own bed, the easiest thing to do is tell yourself it was only a dream. In the dream, he was having open heart surgery. It was not vague. It was not one of those strange, mixed-up dreams where places change and people's faces blur and nothing makes sense. He remembered it as if he had actually been there, experiencing it in real time. He said it felt like real life. He could feel everything that was happening to him, or at least he had the overwhelming sense that he could. He was not just watching from a distance like a scene in a movie. He felt connected to the body on the operating table. He felt the seriousness of it, the pressure, the helplessness, the strange awareness of being worked on while unable to do anything. He could also hear the surgeons talking. That was one of the details that made it stay with him. In a normal dream, conversations can be strange or broken, but this felt different. He remembered hearing the people around him discussing what they were doing, speaking as if they were in the middle of a real operation. There was the sense of a medical room, of trained people focused on something delicate and urgent, of tools and voices, and a body lying open under bright lights. It was not peaceful. It was not symbolic in the way dreams often are. It felt physical and clinical, almost too specific. When he woke up, he was shaken, but he did not think much of it after that. People have vivid dreams. Sometimes you dream about being hurt, sick, trapped, or operated on, and you wake up disturbed for a while. It does not mean anything by itself. He probably told himself it was just one of those strange things the mind creates in sleep. Maybe he had heard something about hospitals recently. Maybe his brain had pulled together random fears. Maybe it was nothing. So he went on with his life. Then, later that week, his mother called him. During the conversation, she mentioned that her sister had recently had heart surgery. My dad did not know that. No one had told him before the dream. He had not been sitting around worrying about his aunt. He had not gone to sleep with the surgery on his mind because, as far as he knew, there was no surgery to think about. That alone made the dream feel strange in hindsight. He had dreamed so vividly about open heart surgery, and then only afterward learned that someone in the family had actually been going through heart surgery. But that was not the strangest part. His mother told him that her sister kept asking her to thank him. His aunt kept saying to thank my dad for being with her. That is the part that still gives me chills. My dad had not physically been there. He did not even know the surgery was happening. He had not gone to the hospital, had not sat in the waiting room, had not called beforehand, had not consciously sent any kind of message. From the outside, there was no reason for his aunt to connect him to that surgery at all. Yet after the operation, she was telling his mother to thank him for being with her. To my dad, the dream suddenly changed. It was no longer just a vivid nightmare about surgery. It became something else, something he could not explain. He had felt like he was on an operating table. He had heard surgeons talking. He had experienced the dream as if it was happening to him. And during that same time, or close enough to it to matter, his aunt was actually having heart surgery and later believed he had been with her. I do not know what to call that. Maybe some people would call it a shared spiritual experience. Maybe some would call it astral projection, or a dream connection, or some kind of unconscious bond between family members. Maybe others would say it was coincidence, that my dad had a vivid dream and his aunt, under stress, medication and surgery, later felt comforted by the idea of him being there. There are always practical explanations people can reach for, and I understand that. Surgery is intense. Dreams are strange. Families are emotionally connected. The human mind can make patterns. But this pattern is hard to ignore. The timing is the part that makes it so strange. If my dad had known she was having surgery, it would be easier to explain. He could have been worried, even if only subconsciously, and his mind could have created a dream around that fear. But he did not know. He had no reason to dream about open heart surgery so vividly. Then, after the fact, he found out his aunt had undergone heart surgery and had specifically said he was with her. That is not the kind of coincidence you forget. I always think about what his aunt may have experienced. Was she aware of him somehow during the surgery? Did she see him in a dreamlike state while under anesthesia? Did she feel his presence beside her, comforting her, even though he was nowhere near the hospital? Did she believe he had helped her through it? Maybe, in that vulnerable state, between consciousness and unconsciousness, she felt something that she could only understand as him being there. And maybe, somehow my dad felt it too, but from the other side, as a dream. The idea is unsettling, but also kind of beautiful. It is not scary in the usual way. There is no ghost in the corner, no dark figure, no footsteps in an empty hallway. It is stranger than that. It suggests that people might be connected in ways we do not fully understand, especially in moments of fear, pain, danger, or near death. Maybe when someone is going through something extreme, the mind or soul reaches out. Maybe it finds someone familiar. Maybe family ties are stronger than distance or knowledge. My dad did not ask for it. He did not try to be part of it. He simply went to sleep and had what felt like an impossibly real dream of open heart surgery. Then, his mother called and unknowingly gave the dream meaning. I can imagine how that conversation must have felt for him. One moment, he is hearing normal family news. The next, he is realizing that the strange dream he had was not random at all, or at least did not feel random anymore. Then, he hears that his aunt had been asking for him to be thanked for being with her, and suddenly the whole thing becomes impossible to file away as just a dream. I wonder if he told his mother about the dream right then. Maybe he did. Maybe he waited. But either way, that must have been a strange thing to say out loud. I dreamed I was having open heart surgery. And then to connect it to his aunt's actual heart surgery. Those are the kinds of stories families remember because they sit outside normal explanation. They do not prove anything in a scientific sense, but they stay with you because the details line up too closely to feel meaningless. The more I think about it, the more I wonder what it felt like inside his dream when he was hearing the surgeons. Did he hear specific words that matched anything real? Did he feel fear? Did he feel pain? Did he feel calm? Was he aware of himself as himself? Or did he feel like he was inside someone else's body? Those questions are hard to answer after so many years, and dreams are difficult to describe even right after waking. But the strongest part of his memory was that it felt real, not symbolic. He was not just dreaming about a hospital. He felt like he was there, and his aunt believed he had been with her. That connection is what makes the story linger. It would be strange enough if he had dreamed of heart surgery and then learned about hers. It would also be strange if she had randomly said she felt he was with her. But both together create something much harder to explain away. The dream and her statement seem to meet in the middle, like two pieces of the same event seen from different sides. Maybe she was scared during the surgery and needed someone with her, and some part of her reached toward him. Maybe he received that somehow in sleep. Maybe he did not travel anywhere, but his mind picked up on something. Maybe love, fear, or blood connection can cross distance in moments like that. I do not know. It sounds impossible. But so does the story if you reduce it to its simplest facts. A man dreams he is having open heart surgery. That week, he finds out his aunt had heart surgery. She had been asking his mother to thank him for being with her. He did not even know the surgery was happening. That is the whole thing, and it is still enough to make me uneasy. I think what weirds me out most is that it was not dramatic in the way people expect supernatural stories to be. Nothing jumped out. No one saw a spirit. There was no haunted house, no warning, no ritual, no obvious reason for it to happen. It came through a dream, quietly, and only became strange after the phone call. That makes it feel more real to me in some ways, because life is often like that. The strangest things do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they arrive disguised as something ordinary, like a dream you almost forget, until another piece of information turns it into something you cannot explain. It still weirds me out to this day. Not because it feels evil or frightening, but because it makes me wonder how much we do not understand about the people we are connected to. Maybe we are not as separate as we think. Maybe, in moments of crisis, something reaches across that distance. Maybe my dad really was with his aunt in some way neither of them could explain. Maybe she felt him there because some part of him was there, and maybe he dreamed the surgery because some part of him experienced it with her. Or maybe it was all coincidence, but if it was one of the strangest coincidences I have ever heard. I house sat one summer for a couple who had a dog and a cat. It was supposed to be an easy job, the kind of thing that sounds almost relaxing when someone first asks you. Feed the animals, keep the house safe, bring in the mail if needed, and stay there while the owners are away. They had a nice enough place, and at first, there was nothing about the house that made me feel like I should be worried. It felt like a normal home. Lived in, comfortable, quiet in the way houses are quiet when the owners are gone. The dog and cat were both there, and having pets around usually makes a place feel less lonely. You do not feel completely by yourself when there is a dog nearby, and a cat wandering in and out can make even an unfamiliar house feel a little warmer. Before the couple left, the lady walked me through the usual instructions. She told me where the food was, what the pets liked, what doors to keep closed, and all the small details people explain when they are trusting someone with their home. Nothing seemed strange until she mentioned the basement. She told me that their dog did not go down there. At first I assumed she meant he was not allowed to go in the basement, the same way some people do not let pets on certain furniture or in certain rooms. So I asked if there was a baby gate to stop him, or if he just knew the rule and stayed away because he had been trained. She looked at me and said, "He's allowed, he just refuses to go down there." That stuck with me for a second, but I did not let it become a big thing. Dogs are strange sometimes. They have likes and dislikes that do not always make sense to us. Maybe he did not like the stairs. Maybe the basement smelled weird to him. Maybe the floor felt strange under his paws. The basement had linoleum in some parts, and I figured maybe he did not like the feel of it. Some dogs hate slick floors. Some do not like certain rooms because of a sound, a smell, or a bad memory. He had no mobility issues, no trouble walking, and no obvious fear anywhere else in the house. He seemed like a normal dog. So I told myself it was probably nothing. The problem was that the guest bedroom was in the basement. That meant I would be sleeping down there. I did not want to overthink it. If I started focusing on the fact that the dog refused to go into the same basement where I was supposed to sleep, I knew I would make myself uncomfortable for no reason. And honestly, the cat had no problem with the basement at all. The cat would come down and hang out with me. It would sit nearby while I watched movies, wander around like it owned the place, and act completely relaxed. That helped me feel better. Animals can sense things, people always say that, but if the cat was fine, then maybe the dog was just being picky. Cats can be strange too, but this one did not act afraid down there. It was comfortable enough to spend time with me in the basement living area, so for a while I treated the basement like a normal part of the house. It was a little isolated, the way basements always are, but nothing too bad. Basements have their own atmosphere. They are cooler, dimmer and quieter than the upstairs. You can hear the house differently from below. Pipes, footsteps, vents and little creaks all sound closer or stranger. Even a perfectly normal basement can feel slightly separate from the rest of the home, like you are sleeping underneath the life of the house instead of inside it. But I was trying not to let my imagination take over. I had agreed to house sit, and I was not going to scare myself just because a dog did not like the basement. One night, I made the mistake of watching scary movies down there. It was the kind of summer night where everything outside felt still, and the house was quiet around me. The owners were gone, the animals were settled, and I had the basement to myself. Watching scary movies alone in a basement is one of those things that seems like a fun idea until it starts working too well. At first, I was fine. I was enjoying the movies, letting myself get into them. But after a couple of them, the basement started to feel different. The shadows in the corners looked darker. The silence between sounds felt longer. The stairs leading up to the rest of the house suddenly seemed very far away. I started to freak myself out. Nothing had happened yet. That is important. There had been no footsteps, no voices, no shadow figures, no doors opening on their own. It was just me, the movies, and my own imagination. I knew that. I could feel my mind doing the thing it does after horror movies, turning every normal sound into a warning. A house noise becomes someone walking. The hum of electricity becomes a whisper. A dark doorway becomes something waiting. I knew I was doing it to myself, so I turned the movies off and decided to go to bed. I went into the guest bedroom in the basement and tried to calm myself down. I lay there in the dark or near dark, telling myself that I was being ridiculous. I remember giving myself a little pep talk. I told myself, it's all in your head. Don't let your imagination run wild. I repeated that idea in my mind because I wanted to take control of the fear before it got worse. I knew scary movies could make a person feel watched when nobody was there. I knew being alone in someone else's house could make every sound seem bigger. I knew the dog not wanting to go downstairs had already planted a seed in my head, and the movies had watered it. I was trying very hard to be rational. Then, instantly, I heard a loud pop of glass breaking. The sound cut through the basement so suddenly that my whole body reacted. It was not a soft creak or a little settling noise. It was sharp and loud, the unmistakable sound of glass breaking or exploding. For a second, I just lay there frozen, listening. My mind went from trying to calm itself to searching for every possible explanation at once. Did something fall? Did someone break a window? Was there a lamp? Did a picture frame drop? Was someone in the house? I got up because I had to check. I could not just lie there after hearing that. The fear had gone from imagination to something physical. I moved through the basement, probably more carefully than usual, and went toward the bathroom. When I turned on the lights and looked around, I found that one of the light bulbs had exploded. That was strange, but I tried not to panic. I do not know much about electrical systems or light bulbs, so I told myself it was probably just a terrible coincidence. Maybe the bulb was old. Maybe there was a surge. Maybe moisture, heat, or some flaw in the glass caused it to pop. Light bulbs can break. Electrical things fail. Houses make noises and objects malfunction. It did not have to mean anything. The timing was horrible, but horrible timing does not automatically mean paranormal. Still, it was hard to ignore the fact that it happened right after I told myself not to let my imagination run wild. I cleaned up, or at least made sure the area was safe as best as I could. Then I went back to bed, still trying to talk myself down. I told myself that I had watched scary movies, scared myself, heard a bulb explode, and now my mind wanted to connect those things. I reminded myself that coincidences happen. I reminded myself that the dog not going downstairs did not mean there was something evil in the basement. I reminded myself that the cat had no problem being down there. I tried to rebuild the calm I had lost, but now the basement felt different. Before the bulb exploded, the fear had been mostly in my head. After it happened, the fear had evidence. Not proof of anything paranormal, but proof that something sudden and startling had happened in the room while I was already scared. That changes how a place feels. Every shadow looks more active. Every corner feels like it has noticed you. The air itself seems tense, as if waiting to see whether you will calm down or break. I got back into bed and continued trying to calm myself down. I closed my eyes, or at least tried to. I remember thinking that if I could just fall asleep, morning would come and everything would feel stupid. That is usually how fear works at night. The next day, in daylight, you wonder why you were so scared. I wanted to get to that point. I wanted to wake up and laugh about the light bulb. I wanted to tell myself that the whole thing was just a combination of scary movies and bad electrical timing. Then, the second I closed my eyes, I heard another pop. Another light bulb. This one was in the basement living room. That was it for me. One bulb exploding right after I scared myself could be a coincidence. A second bulb exploding almost immediately after I went back to bed and tried again to calm myself down felt like the basement had answered me. I know that sounds dramatic, but that is how it felt. It was not just the sound itself. It was the timing. The first pop came right after I told myself it was all in my head. The second came right after I tried to ignore the first one and go back to sleep. It felt like something was pushing back against my attempt to be rational. I did not want to stay down there anymore. At that point, I did not care if there was an electrical explanation. I did not care if the bulbs were old or if the house had wiring issues. I did not care if I was being silly. There are moments when your body makes the decision before your mind finishes arguing, and this was one of those moments. The basement no longer felt like a guest space. It felt like a place I had been warned about. First by the dog, and then by whatever was happening with the lights. I went upstairs and slept there that night. The difference between upstairs and downstairs felt huge. Even if the house was still quiet, being upstairs felt safer. There was more space, more normal house energy, and less of that underground feeling. I do not know exactly where I slept, maybe on a couch or wherever I could make myself comfortable, but I know I did not want to be in that basement alone. The basement had crossed a line. It had gone from a little creepy because I watched scary movies to something down there seems wrong. After that, I never went back into the basement alone. If I had to go down there, I made sure I was not by myself, or I avoided it as much as possible. That might sound extreme for 2 exploding light bulbs, but when you are the person in the house, living through the timing of it, it does not feel extreme. It feels reasonable. You start paying attention to the warnings you ignored before. The dog had refused to go down there from the beginning, and I had brushed it off. I had made excuses for him. I had told myself it was the floor, the stairs, the smell, anything normal. But after that night, I started thinking maybe he knew something I did not. Animals do not explain themselves. That is what makes their behaviour both easy to dismiss and hard to ignore. A dog cannot tell you there is something in that basement. It can only refuse to go. It can stop at the top of the stairs, plant its feet, whine, stare, or turn away. And because we are people, we try to make the reason fit the world we understand. We say the stairs are too steep, the floor is too slippery, the room smells weird, or the dog had a bad experience once. Sometimes that is probably true. But sometimes, maybe, the animal is reacting to something we cannot see. The cat still complicates the story. Because the cat had been fine down there, it would hang out with me and watch movies like nothing was wrong. But cats are different from dogs. Maybe the cat did not care. Maybe whatever was in the basement did not bother the cat. Maybe the cat sensed it too, and simply accepted it. Anyone who has spent time around cats knows they can stare at empty corners like they are watching something you cannot see, then go back to sleep as if that is normal. So I do not take the cat's comfort as proof that nothing was there. It only means the cat did not react the same way the dog did. The dog's refusal stayed in my mind more and more after that night. He had no mobility problems. He was allowed to go into the basement. No one had trained him not to. There was no gate, no rule, he just would not go. That was the simplest fact of the whole thing, and I should have respected it more. He lived in that house. He knew its sounds, its smells, its rooms, and its moods better than I did. If there was one part of the house he refused to enter, maybe that should have meant something from the start. I have thought about the light bulbs many times since then. Could two bulbs explode close together because of an electrical issue? Yes, probably. Could there have been a power surge? Maybe. Could the bulbs have been old, overheated, or defective? Sure, I am not an electrician, and I do not pretend to know every normal explanation, but what still bothers me is the timing. The first one popped right after I tried to convince myself that my fear was only imagination. The second popped right after I returned to bed and tried again. It felt too direct, too immediate, too much like a response. And both bulbs were in the basement. Not upstairs, not somewhere else in the house. The basement. The one place the dog refused to enter. The one place where I was sleeping. The one place where I had just watched scary movies and started telling myself there was nothing to be afraid of. Maybe it was coincidence, but it was the kind of coincidence that makes you change your behaviour. I did not need proof beyond doubt. I needed to feel safe, and I did not feel safe down there anymore. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had stayed, if I had ignored the second pop and forced myself to sleep in the basement anyway. Would anything else have happened? Would more bulbs have blown? Would I have heard footsteps? Would something have moved? Or would the rest of the night have been quiet and I would have woken up feeling silly? I do not know. But I also do not regret leaving. There is no reward for staying somewhere that your instincts are telling you to leave, especially when the family dog already made the same decision long before you did. That is one of the biggest lessons I took from that night. Sometimes the warning comes before the event. The lady told me plainly that the dog was allowed in the basement, but refused to go down there. She did not make it sound dramatic. She did not say the basement was haunted. She did not try to scare me. She just told me the dog would not go down there. I heard that and immediately tried to explain it away, because explaining things away feels safer than believing a place might have something wrong with it. But after those bulbs exploded, I could not explain away the dog anymore. I should have trusted him. The house itself might have been perfectly normal. Maybe the basement wiring was bad and the dog hated the floor. Maybe the scary movies made me sensitive to sounds, and the bulbs were going to pop that night no matter what. Maybe nothing paranormal happened at all. I know those explanations exist, and I can accept that they are possible, but the experience did not feel normal while it was happening. It felt like I was being told to leave the basement, and when I did leave, I never wanted to challenge it again. What makes the story stay with me is how quiet it was before each pop. There was no gradual build, no flickering lights, no buzzing, no long creaking sound, no warning. Just fear, silence, and then glass breaking. The first time, I tried to be brave. The second time, I listened. There is something about glass breaking in a dark basement that cuts straight through every rational thought. It is sharp, sudden, and violent. It makes the air feel unsafe. For the rest of the house sitting job, I did what I needed to do, but I did not relax the same way. I was aware of the basement as a place below me, a place I did not want to be alone in. I still took care of the animals. I still respected the house. But the easy feeling was gone. The basement had become the dog's basement in my mind, the place he refused to enter, and the place I finally understood. I never saw a ghost there. I never saw a shadow person. I never heard a voice or felt a hand on my shoulder. In some ways, that makes the story less dramatic, but in other ways, it makes it more believable to me. Sometimes the scariest experiences are not the ones where you see a full figure standing at the end of the bed. Sometimes they are smaller and stranger. A rule from a homeowner that does not sound like a rule. A dog refusing to go into a room. A basement that feels normal until night. a light bulb exploding the moment you tell yourself not to be scared. Then another one, as soon as you try to close your eyes again. After that, I slept upstairs, and I never went into that basement alone again. Should have trusted the dog in the first place. When I was 9, I remember sitting on the top bunk of my bunk bed, silently cursing my mum out in my head. I was not saying anything out loud, because at that age I still had enough sense to know when I would get in more trouble if I opened my mouth. But in my mind, I was mad. I do not remember exactly what had happened right before that, whether I had been sent to my room, told I could not do something, or punished for something I thought was unfair. I only remember the feeling. I was sitting there, angry in that childish way where the whole world feels against you because an adult told you no. The room was bright. That is one of the details that makes this memory so hard for me to dismiss. It was not nighttime. It was not one of those moments where a kid wakes up at 3 a.m. and sees something in the dark that could have been a dream or a shadow from a streetlight. It was noon or close to it, and daylight was coming into the room. The light was nice and bright inside. I could see everything clearly. I could see the walls, the door, the floor, the shape of the furniture, the bunk bed, and the space around me. There was no reason for me to be scared. Nothing about that moment had the usual setup for a scary story. The bunk bed was right next to the only entrance into the room. That made the door very close to me. If someone came in, I would see them right away. If someone stood in the doorway, I would know. The top bunk gave me a view down toward the floor and the door frame, and because the room was bright, there was no deep shadowy corner where something could hide without being noticed. I was just up there on the top bunk, in daylight, thinking angry little kid thoughts about my mother and whatever had made me upset. Then I noticed movement from below. At first, it was not something I fully understood. It was just motion near the bottom of the door, something where nothing should have been moving. When you are sitting still in a bright room, even a small movement catches your eye. I looked down, expecting maybe to see something normal. Maybe the door shifting a little, maybe a bug, maybe something moved by air. But what I saw was not normal. A black mass slipped underneath the door frame. It did not come in like a person. It did not push the door open. It did not crawl in like an animal. It seemed to slide under the door frame in a way that made no sense, like a shadow becoming thick enough to move on its own. It was black, darker than any normal shadow should have been in that bright room. The daylight did not soften it or break it apart. It moved with purpose, pulling itself into the room from below the door as if the door was not a barrier at all. My anger disappeared instantly. 1 second I was mad at my mum, sitting on the top bunk and feeling sorry for myself. And the next second, every thought in my head stopped. My whole body went still. I remember looking down in horror as the black shape moved. I did not understand what I was seeing, but I knew it was wrong. It was the kind of wrong that does not need explanation. Your body recognizes it before your mind can put words around it. It was another shadow thing. That is the only way I knew how to think of it. A shadow thing, not a person, not an animal, not a cloud of smoke, not just darkness. A thing made of shadow. It had shape, but the shape was not stable in a normal way. It was tall and lanky, stretched too long, bent in places that should not bend. It looked like a body that had been folded wrong, as if whatever it was did not understand bones or did not need them. Parts of it angled sharply, then curved, then stretched again. It was not smooth like a normal human shape. It was wrong in every line. It had what looked like ears or horns, but I could not tell which. They stuck out from the top of it, or from where the head should have been, but because the whole thing was so bendy and shifting, I could not make out exactly what I was seeing. Sometimes they looked pointed, like ears. Sometimes they looked more like little horns. I did not get a clean look at a face, if it even had one. It was too black, too twisted, too fluid in the way it moved. But those points on its head made it look even less human. It slipped up the door. That is what still bothers me most. It did not walk. It did not climb like a person or an animal. It slid upward along the door, clinging to the surface like a living stain. The door was right there beside the bunk bed, and I watched this black shape move from the bottom of the frame up the door as if gravity did not matter to it. In bright daylight, with everything visible, I watched something black and impossible climb without hands, without feet, without any normal movement. I could not scream at first. I think fear froze me before it gave me a voice. I was sitting high on the bunk, looking down and across at the door, watching this thing rise. There was nowhere for me to go without getting closer to it, because to leave the room I would have to get down from the bunk and pass near the door. The only entrance and exit was right beside where it was moving. That meant I was trapped above it, watching it come into the room. The thing reached the ceiling. Then it moved onto it. It slipped from the door onto the ceiling like a shadow crossing a wall, but it had more presence than a shadow. It was not flat exactly, and it did not behave like light and darkness should behave. It seemed to hover or cling above me, moving in circles over my head. I was on the top bunk, which put me closer to the ceiling than if I had been on the floor, and that made it even worse. The thing was not far away. It was above me, close enough that I felt like it could drop down if it wanted to. It started circling over my head. Not fast, not like an animal running around. It hovered in this strange, awful way, circling and circling, as if inspecting me. I sat there frozen, looking up, too scared to move, and too scared not to move. The sunlight in the room should have made it disappear, but it did not. It stayed there, black and unnatural, bending and stretching in ways that made my stomach feel cold. I could not understand how something that looked like a shadow could exist so clearly in a room full of daylight. Time stretched. It felt like an hour. I know it probably was not. It might have been seconds or a few minutes at most, but to a 9-year-old sitting trapped on a top bunk under something like that, it felt endless. Fear does that. It slows everything down. Every second becomes heavy. You become aware of your breathing, your heartbeat, the exact position of your hands and legs, the distance from the bunk to the floor, the path to the door, and the terrible thing above your head. I was trying to gather enough courage to move, but moving meant risking that it would react. I kept thinking I needed to get out, but the only way out was down, and down meant passing beneath it. My body felt locked. I wanted to call for my mum, but maybe I was too scared, or maybe I did not want to draw the thing's attention even more. It was already circling over me, and some part of me felt like it knew I was there. Not in the way a person knows, but in the way something hungry or curious knows. I felt watched, even though I could not see eyes. I felt like it was aware of every breath I took. The strange thing is that the room itself stayed normal around it. The daylight was still there, the furniture was still there, the door was still the door, nothing else moved. There were no storm clouds, no flickering lights, no deep darkness to blame it on. That made the whole experience feel even more impossible. If it had happened in the dark, maybe I could have spent the rest of my life saying I was a scared kid and my imagination made a shadow into a monster. But it happened in bright daylight, and I watched it move from under the door frame up the door, onto the ceiling, and over my head. Eventually, I knew I had to run. I do not know what finally gave me the courage. Maybe I realized it was not leaving. Maybe the fear became so intense that staying still felt worse than moving. Maybe a child's panic finally beat the frozen terror. Whatever it was, I forced myself to jump down from the top bunk. That moment was terrifying. Jumping down meant turning my back on the ceiling for a second. It meant moving quickly, landing near the floor, and trusting that I could get out before the thing came down or blocked the door. I remember the rush of it, the sudden movement after being frozen for what felt like forever. I jumped, hit the floor, and ran. I ran out of the room, crying to my mother. She was confused, of course. From her point of view, I had been sent to my room or had been sitting there angry, and then suddenly I came rushing out crying about a creepy shadow in my room. I must have sounded wild. I was 9, scared out of my mind, trying to explain something that did not make sense even to me. How do you tell an adult that a black mass slipped under the door, crawled up it, bent like it had broken bones, had ears or horns, and circled over your head on the ceiling? It sounds impossible before the sentence is even finished. I tried anyway. I told her about the shadow in my room. I told her something had been there. I do not remember exactly how she reacted after the first confusion. Maybe she thought I had imagined it. Maybe she checked the room. Maybe she tried to calm me down. Adults often do that because they do not know what else to do. When a child is terrified of something they cannot see, the adult response is usually to explain, comfort, or dismiss. It was just a shadow. It was your imagination. There's nothing in there. And maybe from their side that makes sense. But I know what I saw. I was not waking from sleep. I was not in the dark. I was not watching a scary movie. I was not already telling ghost stories or trying to frighten myself. I was sitting on the top bunk in a bright room at noon, mad at my mum, when something black moved under the doorframe. I saw it climb the door. I saw it move to the ceiling. I saw it hover over my head in circles. I felt the fear of being trapped under it, too scared to climb down because the only door was right beside where it had entered. That is not the kind of thing a kid forgets. I have thought about it many times since then, trying to explain it. Maybe it was a shadow from outside, but how would it slip under the door and up the inside of it? Maybe it was light moving from a car or something outside, but the shape was too solid, too black, too controlled. Maybe it was a trick of my eyes, but it moved in a way that followed surfaces and then circled above me. Maybe I imagined it because I was upset, but anger does not usually create a full, moving shadow creature in bright daylight. I have never found an explanation that fits. The fact that it was bent in the wrong places still stands out. If my mind had invented a monster, maybe it would have looked like something from a cartoon or a nightmare. But this was different. It did not feel designed. It felt unnatural, like a thing that did not belong in a human-shaped world. The tall, lanky body, the strange bends, the ears or horns, the way it slipped instead of walked. Everything about it felt like it came from somewhere that did not follow the same rules as the rest of the room. And the way it circled over me felt personal. It did not just pass through the room and leave. It came in, climbed up, and stayed above me. It hovered over my head like it wanted my fear, or like it was watching what I would do. I do not know if that is true, but that is how it felt. At 9 years old, sitting on the top bunk with something black moving above me, I felt like it knew exactly where I was. I still think the strangest part is how normal the day was around it. People expect scary things to happen at night because darkness gives the mind room to create. But this happened in the middle of the day. Noon, bright light. a child awake and alert. That makes it harder to place in the usual category of childhood nightmare. I was not half asleep. I was not dreaming. I was sitting there, fully awake, and then the room changed. After that, the room never felt the same to me. Even if nothing happened again for a while, I could not look at that door without remembering the black mass slipping under it. I could not lie on the top bunk without thinking about the ceiling. The place where I should have felt safest became the place where I had been trapped. And every time I looked at the only entrance into the room, I knew that whatever I had seen had not needed to open the door to come in. It had slipped under. That detail alone still gives me chills. A locked door would not have mattered. A closed door did not matter. The thing came through the smallest space, moved like liquid shadow, and rose up where no real thing should have been able to go. It turned a normal bedroom into a place I wanted to escape from in the middle of the day. I do not know what it was. I do not know if it was a shadow person, a hallucination, something paranormal, or some strange visual event my child brain could not process. I only know that I saw it clearly enough to run crying to my mother, and I remember it clearly enough all these years later to still feel that same tight fear when I think about it. I was 9 years old, sitting on the top bunk, angry in my head, when I saw movement from below. A black mass slipped under the doorframe, climbed up the door, bent in impossible ways, showed what looked like ears or horns, then moved onto the ceiling and circled over me. It felt like forever before I had the courage to jump down and run, and even now, I can still remember exactly how it looked above my head. The house was about 130 years old. It had that old kind of layout that you do not see as much in newer places, with 4 rooms down one hallway, 2 on each side. The hall itself always had a certain feeling to it, especially at night. During the day, it was just an old hallway in an old house, with doors, worn floors, and the usual character that comes with a place that has been standing for more than a century. But at night, when the house got quiet, the age of it became harder to ignore. Old houses have their own sounds. The boards settle, the walls shift, pipes make little noises. Doors seem to breathe with the temperature. You can tell yourself all of that is normal, and most of the time it is. But sometimes a sound or a movement feels too specific to explain away that easily. One night I woke up because it felt like something had jumped onto the foot area of my bed. It was not a dreamlike feeling or a vague sense that maybe the mattress moved. I felt the mattress sink in. It was enough to wake me up. The sensation was clear, like weight had landed or pressed down at the foot of the bed, the way it would if a person, a child, or maybe an animal had jumped up onto it. But there was nothing there that should have caused it. I woke up suddenly, aware of the bed, aware of the room, aware of that sinking feeling in the mattress. At first, I lay there trying to understand what had happened. When you wake up suddenly in the middle of the night, your mind does not always catch up right away. There is that confused moment where you are not sure if something happened in the room or if your body carried part of a dream into waking. But the feeling had been strong. It had not been a soft little shift. It felt like real weight. Something had pressed into the foot of the bed, and my body had responded before my mind could explain it. I did not stay in the room that night. I got up and left. There are times when you can be brave and try to investigate, and then there are times when your body simply decides it is done. That night, I chose another room. It was easier to sleep somewhere else than to lie there staring into the dark, waiting to feel the mattress move again. I told myself I would think about it in the morning, when the house looked normal and the fear did not have as much power. The next day, of course, it was easier to be rational. Daylight always makes strange things feel smaller. I thought about the old house, the age of the floors, the way mattresses can settle, the way a person can wake from a dream with a physical sensation still in their body. I tried to convince myself it had a normal explanation. I did not want to make it into something bigger than it was. Supernatural things usually do not scare me much. If anything, I have always thought they were pretty cool. I like trying to debunk them. I like finding practical explanations. I do not jump straight to ghosts just because something strange happens. So the next night, I went back to the same room. That says a lot about where my mind was. If I had truly believed something was in there, maybe I would have avoided the room completely. But I wanted to know. I wanted to see if it would happen again, or if the first night had only been some strange moment between sleep and waking. I got into bed and settled down, listening to the old house around me. The hallway outside was quiet. The other rooms were still. Nothing seemed unusual at first. Right when I was about to fall asleep, I felt the side of the mattress sink in. This time, it did not feel like something jumped on the bed. It felt like someone sat down beside me. That is a very different sensation. When something jumps onto a bed, the mattress dips quickly and then bounces a little. When someone sits down, the weight presses in more slowly and stays there. That was what I felt. The side of the mattress lowered, just like it would if a person had come into the room and sat on the edge of the bed beside me. I stayed still. My first instinct was to get up again and leave, but this time I forced myself to stay. I wanted to figure out what was causing it. Something natural had to be the culprit. Maybe the frame was shifting. Maybe the mattress was settling unevenly. Maybe the old floor under the bed moved in some way. Maybe I was half asleep and misreading a normal sensation. I did not want to give in to fear without trying to understand it. So I lay there, awake, listening and feeling. The room was quiet around me. I could feel the bed beneath me, the weight or pressure on the side of it, and the stillness of everything else. I waited for another sign, something that would tell me what was happening. Then, while I was lying there, the bedroom door opened by itself. Slowly, it was not thrown open. It did not slam. It opened in that slow, careful way that somehow feels worse than a violent movement. A door opening slowly gives your mind time to process every inch of it. You watch the gap grow. You see the dark hallway beyond it appear little by little. You wait for a hand on the edge, or a face, or a person stepping through. But there was nothing. The door just opened on its own. I tried to convince myself that a draft down the hall had pushed it open. That was the first explanation I reached for, because it made sense in an old house. Old houses can be drafty. Air can move through hallways, under doors, through cracks, through places you do not even notice during the day. Maybe another door or window somewhere was open. Maybe the door had not been latched properly. Maybe a pressure change moved it. I wanted that to be the answer, but I knew how the moment felt. It felt connected to the bed. It felt like something had sat down beside me, and then the door had opened. That did not mean I accepted a supernatural explanation right away. Like I said, I usually try to debunk these things. I do not like jumping to conclusions, but I also could not ignore the sequence. First, the foot of the bed sank in the night before. Then, the next night, the side of the mattress sank as if someone sat down. Then, the door slowly opened by itself while I was lying there awake and trying to stay calm. The next day, I told my brother what had been going on. I think part of me wanted a witness. When strange things happen alone, it is too easy to start doubting yourself. You can tell the story, but people can always say you were tired, half asleep, dreaming, or letting your imagination create something out of nothing. I wanted someone else there to feel it too, or to help me find the normal cause. My brother decided to stay in the room with me that night. That made me feel better at first. Fear is easier to deal with when someone else is in the room. Even if neither of you knows what is happening, at least you are not alone with it. We got into the room and waited. I do not remember if we talked much or if we stayed quiet, but I remember the feeling of anticipation. The room seemed normal, but now we were both paying attention to every sound and every shift in the bed. Sure enough, that night it happened again. It felt like someone sat on the foot of the bed. We both felt it. That changed everything for me. It was not only my body misreading something, it was not only a dream, it was not just me being nervous in an old house. My brother felt the same thing at the same time. The mattress sank at the foot of the bed like weight had pressed down on it. We were both there, both awake, both aware of it. Then he said it felt like something had just sat next to him on his side of the bed. I remember that moment because it made the whole thing feel less like a mystery and more like a presence. Something was not only pressing on the bed randomly, it was moving around the bed, first the foot, then the side. First when I was alone, then again when my brother was there. It acted almost like someone invisible was sitting or standing on the mattress, testing the space, making itself known without doing anything more dramatic. That was really all it would do. It did not scream, it did not throw things. It did not appear at the end of the hall. It did not whisper names or slam doors all night. It just sat or stood on the bed. In some ways, that made it even stranger. If something had gone wild and dramatic, maybe it would have felt like a classic haunting. But this was quiet and specific. A dip in the mattress, a weight at the foot of the bed, a pressure beside you, the kind of thing that makes you freeze because it is too physical to ignore, but too invisible to understand. I have thought about it many times since then, trying to come up with an explanation. A bed frame can shift, mattresses can settle, old floors can move, drafts can open doors. People can feel strange sensations when they are half asleep. All of those things are true. But when the same type of movement happens more than once, in the same room, and then another person feels it too, the simple explanations start to feel weak. I do not know what natural cause could make a bed feel like someone sat down in different spots, especially when two people felt it at the same time. The old house itself probably added to the feeling. A 130-year-old house has seen so much life pass through it. People lived there, slept there, argued there, got sick there, celebrated there, and maybe died there. A house that old is not just wood, walls and rooms. It carries history in a way newer places do not. I am not saying every old house is haunted, but when something strange happens in one, it is easy to imagine that the past has not fully left. Still, what happened did not feel evil to me. It was unsettling, yes, but not in a hateful way. It felt more curious than aggressive, like someone or something was there and wanted to sit on the bed, or maybe wanted us to know it was present. It never hurt us. It never chased us out. It just made the mattress sink in places where no visible person was sitting. That is one of the weirdest things that has ever happened to me that I cannot explain. It was not a huge, terrifying event, but it stayed with me because it was physical. I felt the mattress move. I felt the weight. My brother felt it too. And when you feel something like that, when your own body registers the pressure of something invisible sitting beside you, it becomes very hard to forget. When I was 10 years old, I took a friend out to search for coloured fall leaves. It was one of those childhood ideas that felt simple and important at the time. Autumn had changed the trees, and the ground was covered in brown, yellow, orange and red leaves. We wanted to find the best ones, the bright ones that looked worth keeping, maybe to press into a book or bring home just because they were pretty. At that age, you can turn almost anything into an adventure. A walk up a hill, a shortcut through the woods, a pile of leaves, an old path, all of it can feel like the beginning of something bigger. We decided to go up the hill to the grade school and then into the woods. The school was a familiar place, but the woods beyond it made everything feel different. A school is part of your daily world. You know the classrooms, the playground, the halls, the sound of bells, the feeling of desks and chalkboards and teachers. But the woods behind or near a school can feel like a secret place, even if they are only a few minutes away. They are close enough to be ordinary, but hidden enough to feel like they belong to another world. I remember walking down a very steep hill covered with brown leaves. The ground was slippery under all those leaves, and we had to be careful not to slide too fast. I can still picture that slope, the way the trees stood around us and the leaves made everything look muted and soft. We passed a couple of little streams with wooden platforms across them. To an adult, those platforms might have been nothing special, just simple little crossings over wet ground. To a 10-year-old, they felt like bridges in a secret forest. They made the place feel planned and mysterious at the same time, like someone before us had known this path mattered. Then we found an old foundation. That stopped me. It was not a house. Not anymore. It was just the remains of where a house or building had once been. Stones, concrete, or whatever was left, sitting there deep in the woods as if the forest had swallowed everything else. I could not understand who would have built a house so deep into the woods. Of course, deep meant something different to me then. It was probably only 5 minutes from the school, but to a child, 5 minutes into the woods can feel like another country. It felt far from streets, far from people, far from normal life. I stood there looking at it, trying to imagine a house in that spot. Who lived there? Why was it gone? How long had it been abandoned? Had there been a family there? A road? A path? A whole world that disappeared before I ever knew it existed? I did not have the history or the adult understanding to answer those questions, but the foundation made my mind start working. It was proof that something had been there before us, something real, something built by people, something that had lasted long enough to leave a mark after the rest was gone. I thought it would be a great place for a fort. That idea hit me with the kind of excitement only a child can feel. A hidden foundation in the woods, close enough to reach but far enough to feel secret, seemed like the perfect place to build something of my own. I imagined boards, walls, maybe a roof, maybe a place to sit, maybe a hideout. It would be mine, or ours, a secret place built on top of an old forgotten place. I did not actually build it that day. We eventually went home. But the thought did not leave me. For some reason, that old foundation stayed in my mind for years. Not every day. I did not obsess over it constantly. I went on with childhood, then high school, then college, then grad school. Life moved forward the way it does. But a few times a year, the thought would come back. I would remember that foundation in the woods and wonder what I could have built there if I had started when I was 10. At first, the question was simple. How much wood could 10-year-old me have hauled to the site? Could I have carried boards, one at a time? Could I have dragged materials through the leaves and across the little streams? Could I have built a small fort with scraps, nails, and whatever I could find? As I got older, the imaginary thought grew with me. When I was in high school, I knew more. I had more strength, more understanding, more access to things. I wondered what I could have added by then. Better walls, a real door, maybe shelves, maybe a roof that did not leak. In college, the idea changed again. I knew even more about the world, about tools, materials, and how things worked. I imagined bringing supplies over time, carefully, quietly, wires, switches, small appliances, maybe even plumbing parts. It was ridiculous in one sense, because I was not actually doing it. But in another sense, the imagined place became a long, private project inside my mind. Over 40 years, I kept wondering what it could have become. In 40 years, could I have made a real place? If I had gone back again and again, carrying one piece at a time, learning as I went, improving it year after year, could that old foundation have become a hidden little home? Could I have built walls strong enough to last? Could I have brought electricity somehow? Could I have made it comfortable? Could a childish idea, if fed by decades of effort, have turned into something real? It was not something I talked about much. It was just one of those thoughts that returned every so often, quietly, a strange, private daydream rooted in a real childhood place. The old foundation became a symbol of something unfinished. Not a regret, exactly, but a question. What if I had built there? What if I had kept going back? What if the fort in my mind had become part of the world? After grad school, I moved back. I started a company, bought a condo, got older, got fatter, and lived my adult life. Decades passed. The old neighbourhood changed, because neighbourhoods always do. Places that feel permanent when you are a child are never really permanent. Schools close, buildings get replaced, woods get cut back, paths disappear, new homes go up where empty land used to be. You do not always notice the changes as they happen, because life changes around you at the same time. Eventually, I started walking at night for exercise. That was how I found myself retracing old ground without really planning to. One night, I walked up the hill behind my house and passed into my old neighbourhood. There is something strange about walking through places from childhood as an adult. The distances feel wrong. Hills are smaller or steeper than you remember. Streets seem closer together. Places that once felt far away are suddenly only a few minutes apart. Your memory and the real world do not line up perfectly anymore. As I walked along, I saw lights where the old grade school was. I walked toward them and saw that the school was being demolished, but it was still brightly lit. That sight hit me in a way I did not expect. A school from childhood is not just a building. It holds years of small memories, the kind you forget until something brings them back. Classrooms, teachers, friends, recess, school supplies, winter coats, the smell of hallways, the feeling of being young and thinking the world was much smaller than it was. Seeing it being torn down felt like watching part of time itself get dismantled. In the window of what had once been my 5th grade room, the last crayon drawings were still hanging. That detail stayed with me. The building was coming down, but those drawings were still there, bright little pieces of childhood left in the window as if the school had not fully accepted that it was over. It made everything feel fragile. A place that had seemed so solid when I was a child was now temporary, lit up at night while demolition waited to finish it. The old world was disappearing. About a month later, I went back with my college roommate to show him. I wanted someone else to see it, maybe because it felt too strange to hold alone. As it got dark, we took a shortcut back to my house, which was actually pretty close. That closeness mattered later. At the time, it was just a practical route. We came to a fence, and he, who had always been athletic, struggled to climb it. I, who had once been so thin, struggled to squeeze through. It was one of those small, funny moments that remind you how time changes people. We were not 10 anymore. We were not even college kids anymore. We were older, heavier, different, but still moving through places tied to our younger selves. It was late, and after that he went back to his hotel. I sat in my living room afterward, and slowly my mind started putting the pieces together. The town had been built up over 40 years. Of course it had. The woods from my childhood were not the same untouched woods anymore. The little streams with the wooden platforms had changed too. Today, if you go to the site of the grade school and walk into the woods, then down the steep hill, the little bridges are no longer simple wooden platforms. They are nice brick now. The land has been shaped, cleaned, built into something more official. The wild feeling from my childhood is mostly gone. And if you walk along toward where that old foundation was, toward the place where I imagined building my fort, it has all been turned into condos. That realization came slowly, then all at once. As close as I can figure, right at the site of the fort I had built in my mind for all those years, there is one particular condo. It is my home. The place I bought. The place I lived in. The place I still live. That thought has never fully left me. When I was 10, I found an old foundation in the woods and imagined building a secret fort there. For decades, I kept returning to the idea in my mind, wondering what I could have built if I had carried materials there year after year. I imagined walls, wiring, switches, small appliances, plumbing, and eventually maybe a real place. Then, without realizing it, I grew up, moved back, bought a condo, and ended up living almost exactly where that imagined fort had been. I do not know what to call that. It is not scary in the usual sense. No ghost appeared, no object moved by itself, no voice whispered from the dark. But it feels strange in a deeper way, like life folded back on itself without telling me. A childhood thought became an adult reality, but not because I planned it. I did not seek out that foundation and decide to build there. I did not even realize the connection when I bought the condo. Only later, sitting in my living room, did I understand that the place I had imagined building for 40 years had somehow become the place where I lived. Maybe it is only coincidence. Land gets developed, people buy homes, childhood places get built over. Memory is imperfect, and maybe my estimate of the exact site is not perfect. I know all of that. But as close as I can figure, the spot lines up. The old school, the hill, the streams, the route into the woods, the foundation, the condos, and my home. The pieces fit too well to ignore. Sometimes I think about 10-year-old me standing in the woods, looking at that old foundation and imagining a fort. I wonder what he would think if someone told him that decades later, after school, college, grad school, work, age, and all the changes life brings, he would end up living there after all. Not in the fort he imagined building with scraps and boards, but in a real home built by other people, on land that had stayed with him without him knowing why. Maybe some places call to us long before we understand them. Maybe that foundation stayed in my mind because some part of me already belonged there. Or maybe it was just a strange coincidence, one of those quiet little patterns life creates that makes you stop and look back. Either way, I still live there, at the place where my childhood fort existed only in my imagination for 40 years before the world built it for me.
So that's where we'll stop tonight. Before you go, remember this. Every story you just heard was real. Real people, real nights, and none of them saw it coming. If that got to you the way it gets to most people, do one thing before you leave. Hit subscribe. I post new stories all the time, and I don't want you to miss them. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.